Morning. Good morning, everyone. And good morning to those online as well. Great you can join us. And we too are going to be exploring that parable that Adam just mentioned. But wasn't that special hearing all those different thanks? I reckon we could have gone all morning with different ones coming up. And it's hugely rich. And I'm grateful for you doing that, coming forward and just sharing those things. It's hugely encouraging to hear. So, question. How good a listener do you think you are? Don't have to answer. But I wonder if you're on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put yourself on the kind of listening sort of thing, you know, in terms of what you're like at listening? I don't know if you've ever been in one of those situations where you're talking with someone, or they're talking rather, and you're meant to be listening, and then they ask you the question, so what do you think? What do you do in those moments? What have you done in those moments? Are you honest and say, do you know what, I just was not listening to a word you were saying, as they've been opening up their heart to you, sharing their life with you, what's really important to them with you? Or do you go, do you know what, I just need more time to think about an answer to that? How do you play that one? What kind of listener are you? Listening's important, isn't it? We know that. We know that when people are attentive to us, it demonstrates something of their care and their love, doesn't it? When someone pays attention. There's a bit of an experiment thing that you can do about growing in listening, where you get people to listen to one another, share something really important, then someone listens to them. It's kind of a set-up thing. And on one group, the person listening is just meant to be looking all around the room all the time, just looking over the shoulder, looking around, while this other person is trying. I remember doing the talking bit, sharing something from my heart, and this is just a kind of fake thing, you know, to teach you how to listen more. And I can remember sharing my heart, and my mate was just looking all over the room, deliberately ignoring me. And boy, did it wind me up. I wanted to jump on him and sort of, you know, shake him and say, would you please pay attention to me? There's something so important about being attentive. And that's kind of what we're going to look at today when we look at this story Jesus tells. In one sense, one of the main points of it is really take care how you listen. Be very careful in the way that you listen. We're going through Mark's Gospel, and Jesus has burst on the scene. Goff opened it up a number of weeks ago now. There's this word immediately that Mark uses, kind of Jesus burst on the scene, announcing this good news of the kingdom, that if anyone would repent and believe and put their trust in him, that and calls people to follow him as well. And then there's been healings and these signs and these wonders that Jesus does to point to who he is. In earlier chapters, he's been accused of hanging out with the wrong people. Those people who were tax collectors and sinners and people on the edge of society, and the religious leaders have got kind of wound up by this. And so they're now plotting to destroy Jesus. So he's made quite an impact on those around him. In fact, they want to put an end to him. And I guess the question that's being asked up to this point as we come into Mark chapter 4, well, who is this? I think that's what we're going to be asking. Who is this one? Who's this man? Who's this Jesus? And is he the Christ? Is he the Messiah? And if you know, Jesus Christ, Greek for Messiah, Old Testament, this figure that was proposed basically that God would come and do what we could never do. Last week, if you were here when Steph was with us and he talked from Ezekiel, this passage, this prophet, and talks about how God kind of berates the shepherds of Israel, the leaders of Israel, and says, you're not doing your job. And then says, I am going to come and do it. I'm going to come and be a shepherd among you. And so maybe people are starting to ask, is this the one that's been promised throughout the Old Testament, throughout these prophecies? Is he the fulfillment of these things? Is he the shepherd that has come? And he's chosen 12 disciples as well. Well, why is that significant? Well, there's 12 tribes of Israel. So is he the one to come and lead God's people? Is he the promised Messiah? Is he Emmanuel? Is this actually God with us? That's the important question in who Jesus is. Changes everything for everyone. Is this actually God with us? And so what Jesus does a number of times is when he's with them people, there's healings, he's dialoguing with people, he's reacting to things, but sometimes like here, he sits down to teach a crowd of people. And in Mark chapter 4, if you've got your Bible, turn to Mark chapter 4. It begins this way. We'll just kind of step through this. He began to teach again by the sea, and a very large crowd gathered to him that he got into a boat in the sea, and he sat down in the boat. And the whole crowd was by the sea on the land. So you kind of get that image in your head. Jesus is on a boat, sitting there, big crowd in front of him. Maybe it's because, well, just get away from maybe the press of the crowd on the beach, but also maybe the water would help the sound travel to the people. He wanted people to hear what he was saying. And it says then in verse 2, he was teaching them many things in parables. What is a parable? And I'm sure if you've been around church life any time, you'll know what a parable is. It's like a story. The word literally means to place beside something. It's a placing beside it. It's a comparison of, well, it's a little bit like this. Some would say they're kind of almost like riddles or sayings or similes. I was rubbish at school. I didn't listen. That was my problem at school. I did not pay attention. I don't know what you were like, but I think a lot of my report cards used to say things like kind of, could do better, but kind of needs to pay attention, gets distracted easily. Has anyone else had those sort of report cards? My best report I got at school was when I was 4 years old. Genuinely. It's a really good one. Kind of went downhill after that. But I didn't pay attention. And I didn't pay attention to English. So a simile, these things like as quiet as a mouse. There you go. And I'm sure you're all going, yeah, Toby, you muppet. That is what a simile is. Those sorts of things. And so why does Jesus teach in parables, and what do they actually do? Because we're going to read through this story in a minute. And it might be familiar to you if you've read the Bible at all. If you're not, you may have even heard it if you're kind of new to Christianity, you're new to church today. You may have heard this story about the seed and the sower and the 4 types of soil and the growth and so on. But what happens in it? Let me give you a little riddle. What is always in front of you but can't be seen? Don't answer it. What is always in front of you but can't be seen? Don't say anything. What are you doing now? Hopefully. Thinking, breathing. You're hopefully thinking. You're hopefully leaning in, thinking, what is always in front of me but can't always be seen? That's what these kinds of riddles, parables do. They draw us in. They make us to think. Well, what is it? What's always in front of you but can't be seen? Future. Hey. What was that one? I heard one over there. Your nose. Ah, hey. Depends how. Oh, no, we won't go for size of noses here, because I won't come off well. So anyway, that's the point. They're meant to grab our attention and lean into it, and that says something about where our heart is at to do with the person we're listening to. And in one sense, Jesus, as he tells this parable, he's wanting people to lean in, pay attention to what he's saying. And so, verse 3, he says this. Listen to this. Pay attention. Be attentive to what I'm going to say. And then he tells them the story. And the NIV version, that can come up on the screen, but I'm just going to kind of tell the story. The sower went out to sow. And again, the people were, they were used to farmers and seeing people sowing seed. They didn't have big tractors going down fields or anything. People sowing seed. The sower went out to sow. And people are going, yep, that's what sowers do. Some seed fell on the path, and the path was hard because it had been trampled down. It was solid ground. And as the seed hit the ground of the path, well, it just kind of bounced off, and the birds had a field day. They just had their lunch, and they ate the seed. Some of the seed fell on rocky ground, where there wasn't much soil. And the seed grew. Well, that's wonderful. But the sun came up, and the heat just scorched the plants. And because they had no root, because they had no depth, the plants just withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns and started to grow really well, but the thorns then grew up and started to choke the life of the wheat, and there was no crop. I wonder what the crowd were thinking at this point. They're thinking, man, this is a rubbish farmer. The crop so far isn't looking so good. Maybe it's a waste of seed. Why are you chucking it all over the road for? Why are you throwing it where there's thorns? Why are you throwing it on rocky ground? I wonder if those are the questions. But some of the seed, Jesus said, fell on good soil. And there was 30 times what was sown. Imagine the crowd thinking, that's great. Now, I'm no expert in wheat farming, but apparently 35 times is kind of your average. That's good. That's like what you might expect, apparently. But Jesus says 60 times even, or maybe 100 times what was sown. And people are probably feeling that, I'd love a crop like that. I'd love to see a harvest like that. And then Jesus ends it. Verse 9 says, if you've got ears to hear, listen very carefully to what I'm saying. Listen. And then, as far as we're aware, it stops. Great. Thanks, Jesus. A farming lesson. We come out for a farming lesson, have we? I wonder what the conversations were like on the way home. As people went home, walking along the road, I wonder if some of them were like, well, what on earth was all that about? I'm a better farmer than he is. I know more about this stuff. Others maybe, well, this is Jesus, though. This is this guy who's done all this other stuff. I wonder, why is he telling us this? And yet others went to be with him, and they followed him. They went after him, because the next verse in verse 10, as soon as he was alone, his followers, along with the 12. So this wasn't just the 12 disciples, this was other followers as well. So in one sense, I wonder whether it was just those who were willing to then go after him, who'd paid attention enough to say, well, we want to know more about what this guy is saying, about what this Jesus is saying. And it says, when the disciples were alone with him, he explained, where is it? And he was saying to them, so he then starts to unpack some stuff to his disciples. In verse 11, he says, to you has been given the mystery of the kingdom, but those who are outside get everything in parables. And then he quotes Isaiah, the prophet in the Old Testament, and says, so that while seeing they may see and not perceive, and while hearing they may hear and not understand. Otherwise they might return and be forgiven. Okay, we'll get to what that means in a minute, but you have these followers now who have gone after Jesus. They know there's something more to this story that Jesus is telling. And that's what a disciple does. A disciple is a learner, other words like apprentice, a follower. That's why we've called this followers of Jesus. We're followers. It's not a static thing, being a Christian. It's a dynamic thing. It's a lifetime thing. In fact, we've heard that in the stories, those giving thanks, haven't we? That this has been a journey. This has been a following Jesus over many years. I'm grateful for God in this way. A disciple they're those that want to be with Jesus. They want to be with him. Crowds have gone away, others have followed him. They want to be with him, and they want to learn from him as well. They want to lean into him more. And then Jesus quotes this whole thing from Isaiah and says about you being given the mystery of the kingdom. Well, what does that mean, a mystery? I don't know what you think about. When you think about a mystery, maybe think about a detective thing or something like Columbo or something. That's a bit of an old one. But, a very old one. Anyone remember Columbo? Please tell me, someone. But I don't know what you think about. I think one definition this has helped me is that a mystery, as we talk about it in the biblical way, is a truth that is undiscoverable except by revelation. A truth that is undiscoverable except by revelation. It needs to be revealed to us. Now that is true as one way we apprehend truth. We lay hold of some truth only by revelation. This morning, in fact, in the way that these guys have come up here and shared things with you, they have revealed things about themselves to you that you maybe didn't know before. You maybe knew some of them, you likely didn't know all of them. They have revealed things, revelation, what they're saying is true, and now we have a choice of whether we receive that truth. Now, you may not think I'm not going to question it again because it's, is it that important, whatever, to yourself. But we do, of course, test truth. When someone tells us something, they reveal something to us, we're going to ask some questions and totally get that, and it's important we do that. And when it comes to issues of God and faith and Jesus and all of this stuff that we're talking about, it's important. Well, hey, how do I know that's true? And well, what about that? They're good things to ask. But Jesus reveals things to those who follow him. He tells them things. He brings them in on things. And it's not deserved as well. He says, this is given to you. This is my grace to you. The Bible says that Jesus is the exact representation of God. He is Emmanuel, God with us, like I said at the beginning. The most important question we can really ask about Jesus is this God with us? Is he who he claims to be? Everything else flows from that question, the answer to that question. Is his death, the cross? Is his resurrection the big yes to all that took place on the cross? If that's true, it changes everything. And he quotes Isaiah, and in the context of Isaiah, Isaiah is sent to people to speak to them, the nation of Israel, but basically saying they're not going to listen to you. They've got ears, but they're not going to hear. They've got eyes, but they're not going to see. And Jesus quotes that about those that are listening to him in the crowd. In fact, 5 times that verse in Isaiah chapter 6 is quoted 5 times in the New Testament, and every time it's in relation to kind of people's hardness of heart and their unbelief. And Luke actually says, when he tells this story, that this was Matthew rather, that this is in fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah. That there's going to be people that are going to reject who Jesus is. They're not going to hear, they're not going to see, they're not going to believe, they're not going to turn to him, they're not going to do any of that. He says that people refuse this gift, this grace, who Jesus is, and choose to go their own way. And that's a sobering thing. I think it's meant to sober us. And it kind of makes us ask in the crowd, doesn't it? Well, where do I want to be in the crowd? Where would you put yourself even right now? How would you describe yourself in your relation to who Jesus is? On the edge of the crowd, walking away, walking in, leaning in, on the edge, wanting to know more. I wonder where you'd put yourself. Jesus doesn't stop anyone from following. There's nothing here that would say that. But then those that were with him, Jesus then basically says, well, look, do you understand this parable? Verse 13. If you don't understand this, how are you going to understand all the parables? So Jesus then wonderfully, graciously explains the parable to them. And he kind of gives 4 ways that we might listen. 4 types of hearers, if you like. And the first hearer, he says, are the ones beside the road. They're the pathway where it's hard. They're the unreceptive hearer, where the word is sown, Jesus' word, the truth about who he is, his teaching just kind of gets sowed in, but it just bounces off. It's unreceptive. It doesn't take it in. I mean, pathways are not for receiving in, are they? You don't try and plant on a pathway. And his hearers know that. The seed ain't going to go in. It's hard. But here he says the seed, they listen. It's interesting it says that each one of them, they do hear. But they heard, but they don't sort of heed. They don't take it in. Like one in one ear and kind of out the other, maybe is the kind of modern day analogy. There's a failure to lean into, and the result is total loss. The result is that there's no growth, there's no fruit, there's nothing here. In fact, he goes on to say, these are the ones who are beside the road where the word is sown, verse 15. When they hear, immediately Satan comes and takes away the word which has been sown in them. What do you think about when you hear that? Satan comes, the devil comes. Oh man, you're making this stuff up now, Toby. You actually believe in this sort of stuff in the 21st century, that there's a devil, there's Satan, there's evil in that way. I don't know how you think through this, but one of the ways that helps me think through this sort of stuff is I think that all of us would acknowledge the feel of evil in the world, that we feel it. And I think we feel that when we see things, whether you're a Christian or not. We see things in the world, on the news that happen to people. We think, I feel that this is wrong, this is evil, there's something about this thing that's abhorrent. And we feel it. Sometimes we might take a step then to the fact of evil, the feel of evil, and then the fact of evil. Well, no, some things are categorically always evil. They are wrong. It's a fact that that is evil. It's not just a feeling I might have, but it's a fact of it. But the Bible takes another step, and Jesus takes another step. He said, well, look, behind the fact of evil, behind the feel of evil is a face of evil, personified evil in Satan, in the devil. That this is a reality in the world, at work in the world. And one of the things for me, I look around the world and I see, I've deliberately read about some of the worst atrocities in the world because I want to stare in the face of some of the worst things that happen and think, well, does the gospel make sense in light of these things? And you see the evil that happens. It makes sense that there is an evil in the world. Some people even use that phrase, don't they? I don't know what kind of came over me. There was something that kind of took over, and we see stuff perpetuated in the world that is not just, we don't just feel it, it's not just a factually evil, but the face of evil is in it and at work. I won't go into this more, but if you want to come and talk about that, I'm more happy to afterwards. But this is the first hearers, the unreceptive hearer. I think this is why Jesus taught us to pray daily, keep us from evil, deliver us from the evil one. It's in there in the Lord's Prayer. The second type of hearer is the shallow hearer, the ones in the rocky places. It says in a similar way, these are the ones on whom the seed was sown on rocky places, who, when they hear the word, immediately they receive it with joy. They love Jesus. They love the gospel. This is amazing. I can be forgiven. And there's this church family to be part of. This is incredible. I love this stuff about Jesus and all this sort of thing. But then it says that when persecution comes, when some kind of hardship comes because of Jesus, because of the word he's teaching, what he says, they fall away. If you've been around church a while, you may be thinking of people even. You think, oh, yeah, I remember that amazing testimony. It was incredible. Someone, I've been saved, it's wonderful, and it's kind of joyous, and it's sudden conversion and amazing, and yet, where now? Hardship came. This can happen to us. Our faith will get tested. We will get tempted at some point in following Jesus. Jesus said the way is hard. He never said the way was easy. He said the way's hard. And sometimes, it will happen. Things are going to happen in our lives where are we going to follow Jesus or are we kind of go a different way? If you know the story of Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan, if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend reading it. Get a modern day translation. It's easier than the Old English that was originally written in. But there's a bit where Christian, this allegory of this Christian, he's what's called the hill difficulty. And he's with a couple of other friends, and he's standing before the hill difficulty, this big hill in front of him, and he knows the path that you're meant to take is up the hill. And his two mates, I think there's two of them, and I can't remember which ones they are. They're all different things like pliable and kind of easily distracted. And I made that one up, but something like that. And they're given these sorts of names, and they're like, no, look, there's an easy way. We'll just go round the hill. Why go uphill difficulty? You know, don't be daft. And Christian is like, no, that's the way we're meant to go. That's the path. That's not the way. And his friends go off, and they kind of get lost. And he goes uphill difficulty, and the story goes on from there. See, the shallow hearers, they don't want to go up that hill. They don't want to face the way of the cross. When Jesus said, take up my cross and, take up your cross and follow me. That you will face persecution, you will face afflictions, you are going to face hardships because you're a Christian, because you're following me. You see, when the heat is on, it shows what's below the surface. And these hearers are shallow. And in Luke's gospel it says, at a time of temptation they fall away. Now, I think there's wonderful grace in these verses. Because if you know the story of the disciples, what happened later on to all of the disciples when Jesus was arrested? What did they do? They all fell away. Oh. Peter given us a specific example of that. And yet he's wonderfully restored by the grace of God. And so as I read that and reflect on that a bit, I'm thinking, there's real hope in here as well. Of even if we have been like that, and even if we have hit hardship and we have compromised. I was hearing from a friend who works for Open Doors the other day, and he works with the persecuted church across the globe, and he was telling the story of this Chinese church leader. And this guy got arrested and was brought up in front of the officials and questioned, and basically said, unless you kind of recant your faith, you're going to go to prison for like 20 years or something. And the guy recanted his faith. Because he said, I can't give up my family, I've got kids at home. You put yourself in that position, you're like, what would I do? But as he was walking home, he got convicted and thought, no, I can't deny Jesus. And so he walked back to the officials and said, can you tear that up, please? I'm not recanting my faith. And he ended up going to prison. We all have moments where we do compromise, where we fall away, where we don't follow Jesus, and I think there's grace here for us. So you don't have to stay there. I don't think these are fixed soils, as it were, that we're in at all. I think Jesus says this to make us to lean in, to give us hope that actually we're not simply one or the other. So you've got the unreceptive hearer, you've got the shallow hearer, then we've got the distracted hearer, the ones among the thorns. It says this in verse 18, and others are the ones on whom the seed was sown among the thorns. And these are the ones who heard the word, but the worries or the anxieties of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. There's a lot to be anxious about, isn't there, in the world? There's a lot that we could be worried about in the world, just in our own lives, and yet now because of the wonderful internet, we basically know everything that's going on in the world on a minute-to-minute basis. I mean, you could literally watch the war unfolding. I didn't do this, but in real time in Ukraine, you know, as it's unfolding on the ground, people were videoing it, and you could watch it, and I mean, I don't know, but I'm not sure that I'm designed to kind of cope with everything going on in the world coming at me all the time. Whether it's politics, whether it's the economy, maybe you're worried about the next election coming up, maybe it's about the rising prices and the cost of living, maybe it's AI, maybe it's climate change, maybe it's your family, maybe it's sickness, maybe it's job, maybe it's exams you are facing, maybe it's your house, whatever it might be. And if you weren't worried about something before, maybe I've said something in that list that now you're worried about. I mean, we could. Who here has or is struggling with anxiety? I'm going to put my hand up because I do. And I'll be real. I know what it's like to struggle with anxiety. To get anxious about something. For something to become bigger than it really is in our minds and in our hearts and then affect our bodies. So I know what this is like. But also I know what Jesus is saying here. There's something about anxiety. It's a robber. It steals things. That's what it does. It chokes things. It's a horrible thing. And it's rising, isn't it? In the New Scientist, in the April edition of that came out, they had a special edition on anxiety. And they noted that in 2020, when COVID happened, anxiety spiked up 25% or something like that. Another lady called Jean Twenge, she's written a book called The Anxious Generation, really writing about those who are Gen Z and those who have really grown up with smartphones and the link between online stuff and social. The evidence is all there now. I mean, it's huge since 2012, all documented. That how it contributes into anxiety in this generation. It's a huge deal. So it's not an easy thing. I'm not saying this is a kind of stop being anxious, that's it. But we need to address it in the way that Jesus teaches. But the Bible says here that Jesus is saying our worries of the world can rise up and start to choke fruitfulness from our life. So there's plenty to be anxious about. There's also plenty to get distracted by as well. I mean, we just live in a materialistic, consumeristic society. We do. You know, you walk into a shopping mall and it is designed to draw you in and tell you a story of the better life if you have this or have that or get this new thing. That's what it's designed for, quite literally. That's what advertising is there for. They know what they're doing, playing into the psychology of human beings. And this promise of these, they never have someone looking really down and depressed, do they, on the photos with a sort of new iPhone in their hand, going, because you're going to be, I don't want one of them. There's someone happy, and this is amazing, this is the best thing ever, this is added to my life. And it's a lie. It's just a lie, and yet we live in it, and we're surrounded by it. And it says here that the deceitfulness of riches. That's interesting, isn't it? Saying that somehow there's power in riches, in money. And then Jesus, I think, hints at this as well when he calls money mammon. He says you cannot worship both God and mammon. Money, there's a power in it. You maybe know this little phrase that people don't have money. Money often has people. People don't have money. Money often has people. It has a grip and a hold on people's lives. And that chokes stuff out of our lives. And if you've seen The Hobbit, the first one, The Unexpected Journey, it starts off, I think, like this, where you've got this king dwarf, and he's sitting on this mountain of gold coins and treasure, literally a kind of mountain of gold in a mountain. And he's sitting on there. And there's a little phrase that's used of him. It's called, sickness of the heart. He's got a sickness of the heart that this treasure has caused in his life. And money does that. Money influences people to do all sorts of things evil in the world. Money drives people. Greed drives people. And Jesus says we've got to stay away from that. Don't allow these distractions and stuff and things to grow up. And, well, I've got to have that, and I want that, and that's the important. They're not the important thing. Jesus actually links these two things together in his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where he talks about money and says you cannot worship God and money, and then goes on to talk about anxiety and worry. He says in light of this, hey, a lot of our worries might be linked to money and wealth and wanting our security, our future security. And he goes on to say, wonderfully, I'd encourage you, if you're struggling with anxiety, spend some time paying attention to Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6, where he talks about anxiety. Listen to his words. That's what I had to do this morning. Yesterday I was a bit anxious over something. So this morning I'm in there, okay, no, Jesus, what do you say? Oh yeah, consider the birds. You're like, what do you mean consider the birds? We says, well, because God's going to take care of them. And if them, how much more you? And I love it, because birds are everywhere. You can hear them sing in the mornings. Let that be a provocation to think about Jesus' words and to pay attention to what he says. Let those words take root in your heart. Let his words take root in your heart, and they'll help us. One writer summed kind of this distracted hearer up this way. He said, the anxiety of the age depresses us down away from the word. So anxiety of the age depresses us down away from the word. Delusion with wealth impresses us up and away from the word. Yeah? One takes us down and away from God and away from Jesus and what he says, and one takes us up and away from Jesus. And Jesus is saying that's not the way. It just chokes fruitfulness. The stones spoiled the root. The thorns spoil the fruit. As Matthew Henry said that. The stones spoil the root. The thorns spoil the fruit. What are we chasing? Are we chasing these things in our lives? I was driving down the road the other day on the way here, and a big billboard comes up. Have you got that Euro lottery feeling? I was like, I don't know what that is. 52 million of them apparently. But you know, you're like with the pool and everything. It's like, have you got that feeling? Do you want that feeling? Oh, do that. It's a lie. It's deceitfulness of riches. Jesus wants us to be fruitful. Jesus wants us to flourish in life. Do you believe that? Then we come then to the attentive here, the final one. The ones with good soil. This is the briefest explanation in some ways. It says, those are the ones on whom seed was sown on the good soil. They hear the word, they accept it, and they bear fruit. They're the ones that lean into what Jesus says. They're the ones that don't walk away when they heard the parable, but say, I want to know more. I may not even understand it. They're the ones that even when they hear things that are difficult, because boy, hey Johnny, good to see you, mate. Didn't see you. So I was just saying hello to someone I haven't seen for a while. Even though that Jesus says things that are hard to understand, they still stick with him. The disciples had that experience with Jesus, didn't they? When Jesus teaches about drink my blood and eat my flesh, they're like, whoa, this is hard, and loads of people leave. And then he turns to the disciples, what are you lot doing now? And they're like, well, where else do we go? To whom do we go? You have the words of life. You've got the words of life, Jesus. So even when we struggle and we don't understand things and we grapple with things, attentive hearers are those that stick with Jesus. So, do you know what? I think your words rise above every other word that we hear. Every other word that comes at me in our culture. Your words rise above that, and I want to stick with your words. And Jesus says when we do that, when we stick with the gospel, when we stick with his grace, when we stick with the forgiveness that he wonderfully offers us, his death, his resurrection, when we stick with his teaching about the way to live, as you read through the sermon on how do I live in the world, they hear the word, they accept it, they receive it, and they bear fruit. Jesus said it's when we abide in him, we make our home in his words and his ways that we bear fruit. That's how we bear fruit, not by straining and striving, but by making our home in his words, allowing them to take root in our lives. And then Jesus says you're going to be fruitful if you allow God to do that. Christianity is not about what we make of ourselves. God, I'm going to make something of myself. It's about what we make of Jesus and what we make of what Jesus says, and then working that out and living that out together in a stumbling way. I was thinking about this morning, thinking, yeah, I'd probably flip between at least 3 of those types of soils, as it were. A bit shallow at times, I'm sure. A bit distracted at times as well. But Lord, would you please help me to be an attentive hearer to what you say? And help me to work that out. Thankfully, we don't have to work it out on our own either. We work it out with one another. So I just want to encourage us. I don't know how you describe yourself here in this story, where you think you're at, but be attentive to God's grace in your life. Be attentive to his words above every other word that gets spoken. Abide in him. Be attentive to love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. Be attentive in every situation that you're in. What does it mean to follow Jesus in this situation? And that's where I want to leave it, really, is just with a question. What's it going to mean for you to be attentive to Jesus right now, this week, the rest of today? What words of Jesus do you need to pay attention to hear, accept, and then live that out in the world? What's it for you? I'm going to pray. Ben, do you want to come back up, you guys? Tom will lead us forward in a minute, but I just want to just ponder that for a moment. I'm going to pray. Be specific. Maybe ask God, what is it? Where do I need to lean into you? What words? What does it look like for me to follow you? To be attentive to your word? It might be being attentive to no, you're really forgiven. I really have shown you mercy. You don't deserve it, but I've given you grace, and it's enough. I've forgiven you. My death is enough. It's okay. It might be a word of reassurance. It might be a word of direction. It might be a word of correction. That's okay. I need Jesus to correct me regularly. I need his loving just nudge, say, no, that's not the way to handle that. Or, no, that's the way to go on that. And yes, it might be costly if you follow that way, but that is the hill difficulty. So what's the attention? What's the thing that you need to pay attention to? Lord, I pray for grace for this. And I thank you it's abide in your word, and in that place of grace that then fruitfulness follows. And as we've heard this morning, it is a journey. And so I pray for that. I just pray for each one of us, wherever we're at. Maybe don't even know you. Maybe that attentiveness is to say for the first time, Jesus, I'm yours. I turn to you. I turn away from stuff in my life that I know is wrong. I turn to you. I ask you for forgiveness. I need you. I want to follow you. Maybe that's your prayer. And Lord, I pray for the grace to follow, the grace to take a next step. And I pray for the grace together as well, as we help one another in this, in life groups and other things this week, the grace to walk together in it and to stay attentive listeners and hearers, taking in your word in our lives over the long haul. Amen. Should we stand, please, if you're able to, and they'll lead us, and then Tom will lead us forward in the